guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is entitled City Neighbor Tried to Screw Over a Farmer. He Gets Revenge with a 30 feet hay wall. The area where I live used to be all farmlands where properties were large and mostly ground for planting. That was back in the days when my grandparents and even great-grandparents owned it. Over time though, the farms got sold and the land cut up where now people have a home and usually a small back garden. I kept the family farm though and want to do my best to run it the way I can. The residents though seem to hate that I still keep it as a farm and didn't sell the land and let more homes be built. They think I'm being stubborn, but really I love my family's legacy and truly enjoy the work of a farmer. Still, the land isn't huge, and I have been having many problems when it comes to storage. I have multiple sheds because I found it the easiest way to store things the most effectively. So, I had the idea to try and create a site to process the waste on my farm to save on space. The town though rejected the application, so I was left with trying to figure out even more ways to save space on the farm. I have bales of hay, and nowhere to put them. I had them in the middle of my fields, but still the neighbors constantly complained and was trying to get the town to shut down my farm and force me to sell the property. I was sick of these people who wanted a nice view right through my property and didn't want me doing anything to disturb it. At one point the neighbor who lived behind my property came up to talk to me. "Neighbor, are you kidding me with these hay bales?" Me. "I need to put them somewhere, they are in my fields, it doesn't concern you." Neighbor. "It's an eyesore. Why don't you move them to the other side of the property?" Me. "I can't, my sheds are over there. I have a farm to run, and I have the right to do what I want with my own property." Neighbor. "We will see about that. We stopped that stupid waste idea of yours and I will make sure that the town makes you shut down for this one. Now I had always been raised to not let anybody mess with me. So, I decided to get a little revenge while at the same time complying with what my neighbor asked and moved the hay bales out of the middle of my field. Honestly, the new idea was much easier for me. I just didn't do it before because I was trying to be polite. Screw politeness now though, he was going to get a taste of how it seemed to have your neighbor finally take some revenge. I got some trailers and lined them up against the back fence of my property, the very same fence I shared with neighbor. Then I started to stack the hay bales right on top of the trailers, making his view of my property impossible, and all he was able to see now were hay bales. Keep in mind I did everything according to law and was well within my rights to put them there. It was my property after all, and none of it was leaking onto his or stored in a way that it could fall onto his. Neighbor got pissed when he came out and saw what was going on. He came over to me screaming that he was going to get me arrested for what I had done and then stormed back into his home. It was hard not to smile when I saw that my 30-foot tall wall of hay bales pissed him off. If you think it was kind of extreme, this guy was known to try and call the cops on me at least once a month over something stupid like the watering of my crops being too loud, or even him claiming half of my land belonged to someone else. This revenge was long overdue, so I didn't feel bad about it. He of course did try and do something about it in the form of calling the fire department saying there was a hazard of my wall. I let them come and inspect it to see that they were stored properly and weren't considered a fire hazard. I shook their hands, and they went on their way with the report that nothing was wrong with it. That was really the only thing neighbor could have tried to do, because if it was a hazard it didn't matter whose property it was on. The wall stayed and neighbor got mad and actually tried to sue me for it. It didn't get to the courts though because no lawyer he talked to could find anything illegal about the bales of hay. In fact, him calling the fire department worked in my favor because of the report they wrote saying that they were stored properly and weren't a danger to anything. He shot himself in the foot with that one and couldn't do anything else but complain about the wall and insult me. He loved to go around and call me a bully for intentionally making his view horrible. It was clear that he wasn't actually worried about safety or even the hay going onto his property. He just wanted a nice view at my expense. Now I know some people are wondering, well, what I am going to do with a 30-feet wall of hay bales. As much as I would love to keep it up indefinitely to bother him more, it will slowly dwindle down over the next few months. I need to use it to feed the animals when it gets cold, and they need to stay indoors. It will also get used like a mulch in the spring for my soil. The crops I grow are very good, and part of the reason is that I take really good care of my soil. I don't want to be too much of a jerk of a neighbor, so I don't really know what I will do about my bales of hay when next summer rolls around. The only thing that is stopping me from doing it over and over is that I know some of my other neighbors, who are nice people, didn't really like what I did either. For their sake I might find a new storage option for my bales of hay, and if neighbor keeps messing with me I'm sure that I can find another method of revenge. When you live on a farm there are always plenty of things to work with to put a jerk neighbor in his place. The next story is titled, "Disrespect My Means of Income? I'll Disrupt Yours." I decided to write this while it's still fresh, it concluded just moments ago. I don't consider myself a natural storyteller and err on the side of detail when I do let one fall out. For those interested in a long-winded and winding tale of spite, carry on as usual. I am currently in the town I grew up in, working. This shitty town is hundreds of miles away from my home. I've been here much longer than I expected, and it's been more miserable of an experience than I could have anticipated. The house I'm at happens to be right next door to someone I grew up with, and their spouse. J1 is my childhood acquaintance, J2 is the spouse. This melodrama kicked off 2 nights ago when I went to grab some tools out of my work truck. The truck is an F550 with an 8-panel utility box on it. It's a couple extra deserts shy of 10 tons gross weight. And my tools are how I make my living. I obtained a reverence for quality tools early on because of their ability to provide. I rarely loan them out, but when I do it's under expressed conditions. The truck has to sit in the driveway as it won't fit in the garage. The edge of the driveway is inches away from the property line shared with J1 and J2's house. They rent the house. I've known S, the landlord of said house, for my entire life. S and I have a very good relationship. Back to the tools. I went out to grab something from one of the panels in the truck when I noticed a uniform extrusion of snow in the bed portion of the truck. I discovered that under the fresh snow was my open, double-fold case of all of my priority sockets, wrenches, pliers, etc. The case itself I made as a project when I went to school for trade certification. The shell is aluminum, the inside is blow-molded plastic I made specifically for those tools. I had to make the one-off mold for the plastic. I pressed the hinges that I made from scratch. I hardened the cam of the locking mechanism myself. It was a final project for a class that received high praise from the instructor, who was a veteran machinist. By high praise I mean he gave a critical scowl while inspecting, and finished with a grunt and not bad. The case received a perfect score. It wasn't just the case, open to the elements, left out for anyone to grab. It was all of those bare tools, buried in snow. I do not treat my tools like that. If someone treats their own tools like that, I judge them for it. Abuse of my tools virtually never happens because there is hardly ever an occasion where I'm not in control of them. But someone left my single most valuable piece of kit out to rust or walk off. That someone was certainly not me. A few nights ago J1 texted me asking if J2 could borrow a cordless drill. I said sure, so long as he put everything back when he was done and locked back up. He knew where the key was because I had grown to trust him over time. That came back to bite me, as it seems it always does. After discovering my tools in that state, I took them in to clean and lube everything and calmed a tiny bit when I discovered the damage was mostly superficial. The jury is still out on a pair of digital calipers. I was still fuming over the disrespect though. Yesterday I decided to do a complete inventory of the truck to figure out if anything was missing. It doesn't take more than a half hour since everything is indexed. There is a hook, clamp, or holder of some kind to keep all of my tools. It's a significant initial investment of time that doesn't take long to recoup. I shave minutes off of my work every day because I don't need to look for things. I know exactly where they are. Once I had my list of missing tools, I headed over to the Jace house, cordless driver, a few bits, 2 batteries, a pry bar and a 4-foot spirit level. When J2 answered the door he was clearly drunk, which was standard for that time of night. He didn't know specifically what he still had but promised me he'd check in the morning. I informed him that given the state I discovered my tool case in, tomorrow morning wasn't good enough. He advised I quit being a little witch about the matter and he'd get to it when he found time. My fury was only bubbling at a light simmer, so I gave him one last chance. I asked him explicitly if he was refusing to give my tools back. He instructed me to self-copulate and forcefully closed the door in my face. I could have let it go and just diffuse over time and maybe get my tools back. But that's not something I'm capable of doing in a situation like that. I try to avoid confrontation because I don't back down until the other person loses. It can result in a net loss for me as well, but it becomes about extracting that pound of flesh. It's a character flaw for sure, but I'm aware of it and do my best to mitigate it. Thankfully, this turned out to be far milder than I was prepared for. So the next stage of escalation was one I really wasn't looking forward to. Police. I was tangentially involved with several different LIAs, both privately and professionally, for almost 2 decades. My feeling about law enforcement started as a kind of ignorant reverence, which turned to fascination. But over time, through intimate dealings through several facets and several agencies, I developed a profound and righteous contempt for law enforcement. There are otherwise decent people involved, to be sure. But as a whole, there's not a single class of people I hold in lower regard. And J2 required that I involve them. So I called the non-emergency number to dispatch an officer, reference theft. Now, I knew perfectly well the cop couldn't do anything because it was a civil issue, but I had 3 goals. Perhaps recover my property. Maybe J2 would become belligerent and earn himself a sleepover with the local drunks and petty criminals. But primarily I wanted a call log to reference if I needed to file a small claim against the spouse of a family friend I've known for almost 40 years. The cop showed up within an hour and I gave him the rundown. He was sympathetic but explained what I already knew. He still made contact to try to resolve the situation. Kudos. J2 was doe-eyed at the appearance of a cop and was ready to surrender the hostage tools, but J1 was the one that became belligerent, throwing the bits and level off of the deck. All while chastising me for such a betrayal. It turns out J1's dad actually had my driver, batteries, etc., so they weren't even around to be had. J1 informed me I'd be lucky if they could be found after such a betrayal. I'll agree, it wasn't a whole move on my part, but I just wanted my pound of flesh and my tools. The cop left and I went inside. Before bed last night I hatched my revenge. And after a brief chat with landlord, I could hardly get to sleep. At about 5 this morning I plugged in the truck heater. At about 6:30 I started the truck, let it fully warm up for about 15 minutes, then backed out of my driveway, pulled around to the alley and into the Jace driveway behind their vehicles. I dropped the bracing jacks on the truck and jacked up the axle on one side. I put jack stands under the raised side of the axle and used my pneumatic impact to remove both rear wheels on the raised side. I spun the impact until pressure was low enough the vanes wouldn't engage to spin and went back inside where it's warm. Freezing moisture prohibited me from running the air compressor in near 0 degrees Fahrenheit weather, so pneumatics were now dead. Their driveway access is from the alley, mine is from the street. Their driveway terminates just past the front of my garage right on the property line. There is just enough room for them to park side by side, but they're blocked in on 3 sides by most of my garage, their deck, and their fence. And at now the 4th side by my incapacitated work truck. At about 7:40 a.m. I answered a furious pounding at my back door. Surprise. It was J2. He inquired what in the copulation my truck was doing in their driveway. He had to get to work. I informed him I moved there for better access to the airline at the back of my garage, fed through the back window. But due to the cold, the frozen moisture prevented sufficient pressure to remount the wheels. He was visibly shaking from anger and informed me I was ducking with his livelihood. Curious, I replied, "Tools are my livelihood." At which point I repaid his forceful door closing with one of my own. I received a flurry of texts and disparaging remarks from J1, peppered with a few vague threats. At just past 8 a cop car pulled in my driveway. Lo and behold, it was friendly Officer XX12. The same cop dispatched last night, looking a bit rough around the edges from working a double shift. I stepped out to greet him. He looked at me, panned to the truck, back to me and asked, "What the hell is going on?" I informed him of my attempted maintenance on my truck, but unfavorable conditions prevented me from finishing. I told him if I'd had all of my tools, I probably could have finished without issue. Which of course earned me a withering look. All while J1 was haranguing us with her perception of the law and what exactly needed to happen, through the kitchen window. I informed kindly Officer XX12 that I had the property owner's consent before attempting my labors. J1 opined, "It don't duckin' matter. She need to give us 24-hour notice. You need ta blah, blah, blah." As it turns out, Notice is only required 24 hours before entry of the domicile. No notice is required for external portions of the property. It just so happened that the tools I needed to finish were the tools J1's father still had in his possession. Officer XX12 inquired how far away they were and suggested J2 walk there to get everything if he wanted to make it to work at all today. J1 insisted the officer provide conveyance. He declined, stating again, it was a civil issue. 15 minutes later I had my tools back. I used the driver to run down all the lug nuts on the wheels but, of course, used a bar for final torque. As it turns out, the tires weren't leaking and pressure was within operating range. So maybe unmounting them wasn't entirely necessary. I put my tools away, moved my truck back, and double-checked the surveillance camera on the driveway, just in case. While typing this, J1 informed me I now owe them dollars for J2's lost pay, he's salaried, and also dollars for the speeding ticket he got going to work. I can't find words for the amount of vengeful glee I'm feeling right now. Thanks for listening.